Welcome to The Future of Things, a podcast powered by Blue Byte. I'm your host, Amanda Costco. Thanks so much for joining us. Advertising is not the static billboard or bus wrap that it used to be, thanks to innovations in digital technology. Developments in cloud computing, data collection, and smartphones are changing the way we as consumers experience advertising. Here to speak with me about the future of out-of-home advertising is Dallimore. He's the Vice President of Digital Growth at Lamar Advertising, and he's joined by Blue Byte's very own founder, Mikhail Damiani. Welcome to the show.
Hey, it's great to be here.
Thanks, Amanda.
So I'd love to know, when did digital become its own category within out-of-home at Lamar? You know, we know about billboards and bus wraps and things like that, but some folks might not know that digital is its own category. So talk about that.
Yeah, so ironically, we're actually celebrating our 20th year of digital at Lamar Advertising this year. So we began in 2001, and we began to kind of implement this idea, kind of play with the idea of the technology, and it just kind of morphed into the way. One of our executives who's now retired, we actually spoke to him on our podcast a little bit earlier in the week, and we talked about that. Like, how did it inspire you to go this direction, and was there a demand there? So for the industry itself, I believe it caught on maybe 2 to 3 years later, and then now it's become a prominent part of the industry. And Lamar itself, we have over 4,000 screens across the US and Canada, mostly roadside, but airport and transit as well.
And so out-of-home advertising is a super exciting place to be right now because of new innovative technologies. Can you tell us a little bit about which technologies are transforming this space right now?
Yeah, and that's kind of my role with Lamar. I've been here for 16 years, and one of the biggest things that I've always implemented, and it's actually how I began to become friends with Mikhail and work with Blue Byte, was always trying new technologies, right? So it was probably 10, 11 years ago, Mikhail, where we focused on and said, hey, why don't we play with this concept of combining mobile with out of home? And that kind of took off. We've continued to implement that into our company. But over time, it's been embracing those new technologies that exist in the space. And I would say the biggest two things that are transforming the space today is programmatic advertising. So the ability for, just as consumers can buy digital, online, mobile, social, and CTV, they now have the ability to buy programmatic digital out of home across multiple formats, not just Lamar. And also, obviously, the rise of data and the importance of data has helped uplift the programmatic side of things, but even the traditional side of our business, you know, the ability to hone in on a specific segmentation of an audience. So I would say programmatic and data have played a extremely important role in transforming the industry itself.
Yeah, and I want to get into some specific case studies in a bit, but Mikhail, maybe you can tell me about how Blue Byte syncs up with Lamar.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, Ian, you can chime in here. As Ian said, we started talking at this point over a decade ago and thinking about how does Blue Byte or out of home, how do they, as you said, sync up together? How do they work together? From the beginning of Blue Byte, it was always our kind of initial opportunity that we saw was taking the out of home advertising that we saw on the streets of New York and saying, okay, how do you take this impression-based medium and convert it into an engagement-based medium where everybody has a phone, you have all this physical advertisement, how do you actually get those two to connect? So that was kind of the beginning ideas, right? How do we do this? Part of it was formats where you could engage face-to-face, so things in New York that are within arm's reach, where you can use things like QR and NFC. But the challenge with Lamar was the fact that most of their inventory across the US was something that you can't actually reach out and touch. These are roadside billboards. These are signs that are 20, 30 feet up in the air. Even in New York as well, you have things on, wallscapes and things like that. So the challenge was, how do you take that same exact concept of out-of-home advertising and a mobile consumer and combine them in the absence of the ability to interact at arm's reach? And so this is where we started the conversation. And we've had multiple, as you can imagine, iterations over the past 10 years around using geofencing technologies, which are, cellular based and cloud based versus things like near field communication and QR that are physically installed at, let's say, a Lamar bus shelter. And we've done all of those depending on which markets we're talking about and what kind of assets they are.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that Blue Byte helped with specifically the geofencing was the limitation, right? So you drive past probably 20 to 30 billboards a day if you're in a mid-sized market. But how do you continue that conversation? How do you get the consumer to engage? So I think that partnership early on was a big opportunity for us to keep that conversation going with a mobile app and allow the consumers to engage a little bit deeper. And then obviously, our first campaign together, I'll never forget, it was Kind Snacks, where we were in Chicago and we said, okay, what does a health conscious consumer look like? And we basically geofenced every Whole Foods, gym, yoga studio. And it's still kind of funny looking at it today. And now it's kind of become the way, right? So when you're exposed to that digital billboard and then you get served with that mobile ad whenever you walk into a Whole Foods and you're served a coupon, that's game changer right there. And that was kind of it at the infancy. We've morphed into so many more dynamic campaigns using out of home and mobile together.
Yeah, that was what, if I had to guess, maybe 2013, 2014?
2013. Yeah. And now the industry itself has done thousands upon thousands of campaigns using the two mediums together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things I would say, Amanda, about Lamar and Ian for sure, obviously as spearheading that effort, is even though you guys are over 100 years old, right, as a company?
120.
Yeah, 120-year-old company based out of Louisiana, and I'd say they were actually pretty much ahead of the curve when it came to a lot of the stuff. So, not necessarily something you'd expect from an old company, but at the same time, it's probably that spirit of looking out at what's next and how can we innovate that's kept them in the game and kept them a leader in the space for so many years. So, hats off to you guys. I think you guys have done a phenomenal job at looking at what's next, but also having a pretty measured approach, I would say, to trying out different things, seeing how they work, optimized versus just jumping in head first into some of these things. So I think they've done a great job at that.
Yeah, and I think when you asked the question about case studies, two brand new studies that just came out, and it really kind of birthed, Amanda, from utilizing mobile and out of home, is there was one way you serve mobile ads based off of exposure, but there's another way to measure when you're exposed to the out-of-home ad. So, one of the most recent campaigns that we did was Starbucks and Nestle were rolling out a new product in store, and just the high-level stats, the consumers exposed to that ad, the Nestle ad, Starbucks ad, those exposed saw a 42% lift in store visitation compared to those who were unexposed. And the bigger opportunity the bigger statistic is 79% were more likely to visit that specific grocery store after being exposed to that ad. So not only are we seeing hundreds upon hundreds of campaigns that we're able to measure, but it also gives more validity to why out of home plays an important role, digital out of home specifically, in that consumer journey across multiple media.
Yeah, and what would you say to people who are concerned about privacy? They think of something like Minority Report, where the ads are so super targeted and they know everything about you. How do you balance that with delivering that customer experience that your clients want to provide?
That's a great question, and I think it's an imperative question. Every vendor that we work with, including Blue Byte, we also work with Foursquare, M4, and a handful of other measurement companies. And the first thing we do is we talk about, how are you GDPR compliant or CCPA compliant? And on top of that, we then say, I'm not interested in targeting specifically Amanda or specifically Mikhail. I want to target a lookalike audience that will make an assumption here. We're all health conscious consumers. So I want to target consumers that have been to the gym recently and maybe eat healthy. And there's different ways for us to go about capturing that data, and maybe Mikhail can touch on that. But for us, what we're looking at is an audience segmentation as opposed to just serving an ad. Because as you could imagine, that would be absolutely terrifying if, we were taking Google search history or whatever history you may have on your mobile device, and then you walk past and it's like, oh, here's an ad that's very obtrusive and extremely targeted towards one-to-one. So we're still very much one to targeted is kind of the way that we imply that today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I would obviously echo that sentiment. I think from our founding since the beginning, we've always been consumer first, right? So that's kind of the way we create our products. Our mission is related to improving lives for consumers, right? By connecting people and information through the physical world. And certainly we do a lot of that with physical products themselves, but in this case, we do it with media. But that same ethos and same idea of consumer first is always in existence. And I think one of the things that allows us to do this effectively, especially in out of home, is the fact that you do have a physical element. So we're not just doing random, either random or audience segmentation based on all of these profiling of specific individuals. We can make a really good assumption about people based on just where they are. So, Ian brought up the kind snack example before. If somebody's in a yoga studio and we know they're in a yoga studio, we don't really need to know who they are or what their affinity is. We can assume, with a pretty high degree of accuracy, that these people like yoga. And so having the physical aspect of what we do allows us to capture way less data and to have a lot less data around who these individuals are, because we don't really, we care only in as far as we can deliver the right message to the right person. But by having the physical aspect tied to what we're doing, it makes that a lot easier for us and doesn't require so much of that data capture that you would need to do if you were lacking the physical aspect.
And I would argue, Amanda, that the visitation as opposed to a search or a download of an app is even more specific, and it gives you better data, and it allows us to be more clean about the ads that we serve, as opposed to, we oftentimes are searching things just to search, or we're bored, or you may just randomly be caught in a YouTube video B-roll kind of what's up next. And you're like, oh, how to end up in this world? To Mikhail's point, if you're visiting a grocery store, a Whole Foods 3 times a month, that's an actual purchase visit, and you can really truly put them in that category, as opposed to someone that may be searching health food and has never gone to the gym ever, and putting them in the wrong bucket of a data set.
Exactly. So that intent is kind of quite clear when somebody's physically doing the action.
Yeah, I've always said as a consumer, I don't mind being advertised to as long as I enjoy the advertising. But when it's out of context, it feels like they don't know me, and then why are you advertising to me? So tell me about what the out-of-home category is going to look like in 2050. Is it useful to even have out of home as a separate category, or is everything just becoming IoT and connected products?
Yeah, and Mikhail knows this is my favorite world that I love to live in, is kind of the future of things. And you could see him smirking because I could go off on a tangent. So what I feel is you're spot on, Amanda. I think where we are from the programmatic perspective today, some of the larger omni-channel DSPs that we're transacting with, like Yahoo, the Trade Desk, Adelphic, et cetera, as they buy across multimedia types, it all of a sudden just becomes one screen, right? And it's just what time of day or at what point in that consumer's journey are you reaching them? And so as you look into the future, I think that out of home plays an important role in all sorts of things. So you'd mentioned, the IoT of things. We sit on a lot of smart city committees because we do play a role. So if you talk about Wi-Fi towers and you talk about, Wi-Fi casting. So we may play a role in the sense of we're providing Wi-Fi to, urban parts of a community that maybe otherwise wouldn't have Wi-Fi given to them. Maybe out of home and Lamar plays a role in that sense, that it's providing Wi-Fi. Also the connectivity of cars with the driverless car. And I also believe when you talk about the connected world, right? As consumers use, I know our home is a connected home, and it's almost over the top connected with Google, and my kids ask Google all sorts of things. But how do we take that consumer that's connected to their home, and then it extends into their vehicle? So whether it's a driverless vehicle or a smart car, like a Tesla or like a Rivian, and it's capturing that data that's coming from your Google Home. Well, as you're making your way throughout the city on your journey throughout the day, maybe you're picking up kids, maybe you're running errands, that out of home could then play a role. So what is the search history of that consumer? What are they looking to get? Are they going to a grocery store? So now I can promote cereal on those digital boards, because now I can capture and talk to the car, but more importantly, change digital. Again, not one-to-one, maybe in the future it's acceptable, but that's the world that I think we live in. And Mikhail can touch on a lot of the stuff with wearables. I know I wear a Whoop, and there's a lot of connected garments and that sort of thing. How does a consumer walk up to a bus shelter, and maybe they have an old version of Adidas, and that digital bus shelter can change because maybe a newer version of that shoe pops out, or maybe your Whoop or your wearable says, hey, he burned 700 calories today. Let's promote a certain muscle milk or some sort of product that makes sense to that consumer. That's where I don't even think it's 2050. I would say in the next 10 years, if not sooner, we're in that space.
We're in an interesting position as Blue Byte where we sit on kind of two sides of the product journey or the consumer journey, if you think about it. So you have your consumer interaction with the products that they're buying, right? So you can go into a store, you can interact in the store, you can interact with the physical product, and this is the work we're doing with a lot of brands globally. And then on the media side, I would say currently it's pretty fragmented from that, right? So it's kind of a separate consumer journey as it relates to being exposed to ads, then driving into retail. So where we see a lot of potential, and Alex and our team is doing a lot of work in this, is how do you bridge those two? Because currently they do exist from a buying standpoint in completely different locations, right? Media is usually bought through agencies, whereas the work we're doing with brands is done directly with their marketing and product teams. And so if we think about it and we take a step back and we think about it from a consumer standpoint, what does that connected journey look like? I may be exposed to some kind of new product offer on an out-of-home billboard. Maybe I walk into a store and I discover it. Maybe then I can interact with the product. And depending on what I've done throughout that journey, my experience can change. And that goes back to kind of our main point of the platform that we provide, is the ability to deliver these contextual and personalized experiences based on what you've done before. And as I said, right now they're kind of separate, but I see an opportunity where whichever one drives first, right? It's kind of a loop. You may enter that loop in the store. You may enter that loop as a consumer already owning a product, or you may enter that loop as somebody who sees an out-of-home digital screen or static screen, whatever that may be, kind of to the point that Ian made. So I think this is what's interesting to us and where I see it moving. And I think, Ian, you're right. Probably, I mean, we're already trying to do some things in that realm now. 5 to 10 years is realistically where we can see this type of cohesive consumer journey, where it doesn't really matter where you enter. You can continue that cycle and continue to experience that product journey.
Yeah, in 2050, maybe we'll just make a bold statement and say Lamar's going to start buying digital screens on Mars, and we'll be the first platform there.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you, with all this talk about the metaverse, and a lot of the business models in the metaverse are replicating some of the business models on Earth, and you're in the business, or Lamar is in the business of buying real estate that you can then advertise on. So, how are you thinking about the future of not only just digital advertising with these new digital platforms, but as screens become everywhere, how do you sort of expand your business everywhere?
That's over the last year and a half, I've spent a lot of time in the metaverse. For the record, I haven't created an avatar or dug deep, but I have, to your point, Amanda, I have walked around in the metaverse space, and I said, this is fascinating, but it is this new world. I think gaming, online gaming has definitely elevated that. Today you can walk around, my kids play these different 9-year-old games where Animal Crossing, where sometimes you'll see a little yard sign pop up, and I'm like, that's an advertisement. But I think that's kind of led the way to, if you're playing Formula One or an NBA game on your device, ads begin to pop up and they're becoming more dynamic. I think for us, that world of buying real estate in the metaverse, it's a real thing. Without saying too much, I've personally already bought out a couple of, I forget what they're called, but basically little squares of land. So I'm like, a lot of people walk around here. Here's a Gucci store. Let me just buy a couple of bricks here. So I do think out of home is going to play a world in the metaverse. And, as you walk around there, it does get confusing. So in our original sense of a company, it was 4 miles ahead, exit 58. We may say, whatever the terminology is, a couple of clicks ahead and you're at such and such art gallery or shoe world. So Amanda, you're spot on. Maybe we should go into business and start buying, and we'll sell it to my own company here at Lamar.
Maybe one day. Great. Well, anything else that either of you would like to add about out-of-home advertising, the future of IoT, and especially as this touches on consumer experiences? Because I do feel like it's going to feel very different to be a consumer in 30 years, 50 years from now.
Just my wrapping up is, to Mikhail's point, today it's very segmented. When you buy CTV online and mobile, it's one experience. When you buy out of home, digital out of home, unfortunately, it still is a different experience, even from creative. And then when you're talking about, the product of things that Blue Byte focuses on, it's another buyer brand awareness. I think where brands can succeed really, because we as consumers, it doesn't matter what the screen is that you're serving us the ad, it's when and why you're serving it to us. So I think as brands start to understand this universe as one and becomes a true omni-channel, today we sling around that word pretty easily, but once a brand truly understands that a consumer journey is all sorts of screens, I think that that's where you're going to see this different world of advertising shift. And I think we're in the infancy of that shift. And I think companies like Blue Byte definitely help us shift over to that world.
Yeah, and I'll add in terms of experience, I think this is something that, when we were on Ian's podcast, was it last week or 2 weeks ago, I kind of challenged the notion of campaigns, because this is how the advertising world thinks of just the flights and campaigns. So everything is a 4-week campaign, 8-week, 12-week, whatever that is. Whereas we always challenge the brands, and I would say the brands in general on the product and brand side really look at it as it's an always-on experience. There is no time. It's forever, right? As soon as you buy a product, you buy a pair of shoes. For as long as you own that, you can have a brand experience. It's not time gated. It's not limited. The difference is the experience itself can evolve. The content can be time gated or special, or a promotion or a campaign you can run on that, but the experience itself should be holistic and it should be always on. And so to the extent we could align on some of that type of thinking across the different industries, I think it will help, because then you're basically thinking of your own medium or your role in it as part of that experience, right? You're not running just a campaign or that. It's really, how do you look at the whole experience? You align on that. How do you create integration points that give the consumer a feeling of, a frictionless experience? As Ian said, they don't really care who's powering the screen, who's buying it, the exchange behind the scenes. No, they just care about what am I getting as a consumer? How easy is it for me, and how frictionless? So I think that's what I'm excited about. And from the Blue Byte perspective, we're going to keep pushing for that, because we want to make sure that the consumer has the most frictionless and most valuable experience that's actually delivering real benefit to them on a daily basis.
Well, thank you so much, gentlemen. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Amanda. Mikhail, always great to see you, my friend.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for joining.
That was my conversation with Ian Dallimore, the VP of Digital Growth at Lamar Advertising. He was joined by Blue Byte's founder, Mikhail Damiani. For more episodes of The Future of Things, subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever the best podcasts are found. The Future of Things is brought to you by Blue Byte. Blue Byte connects brands and consumers through products. To learn more, visit bluebyte.com. I'm your host, Amanda Costco. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you in the future.